Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about how to grieve. I took today's episode that we were planning on doing and just moved it to next week. And we're going to just record this real quick here before we put it out today, something you're never supposed to do. And we're going to talk about how to grieve. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
Hello, friends. Wherever your day is, I hope that it's going well. I hope that you are having a good day today. I'm doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to move back to next week what we were planning on doing today, which was scheduled and ready to go. I've been feeling this for a few days that I needed to do this. And then this morning I was talking to my wife as I was getting ready for work, and she was like, hey, I'm going to put this thing up on my Facebook about how to grieve because there's been so much grieving in our community over the last week. And I was like, wow, I was thinking about doing that with my podcast. And so I think that's kind of more confirmation that that's what I should do. And so that's what I'm doing. This is going to be a one-shot deal. I'm going to record it. Maybe we'll be able to edit out some of the gaps and the crazy breathing and the half words and all that. Maybe we won't. But we are going to go ahead and try to get this started. And I also know that I have listeners that are not local to where I live. And so this might not make any sense to you, but who doesn't go through grief is one of my thoughts. And so probably talking a little bit about it is a good thing. And I'm going to borrow some things right from my wife. She has a list of 9 things. I'm going to use some of that. For those of you who aren't local, there was a man in our community who passed away in February. And this past weekend, his 18-year-old son passed away. And so there is a lot of grief in our community for the man, of course, for his son, for his wife, for his children that are behind, for his family. And even if you don't live local, you've gone through grief. And so today I want to talk about ways that you can manage grief around you. You can walk through your own grief. And I hope that it's helpful. This is not me preaching to people, because I'll be honest with you, I've purposely driven a different way to work so I can go past the spot where this young man passed away. And I don't even really, doesn't make sense. But here's kind of the first thing then that we need to talk about when we talk about handling grief, when we talk about managing our own grief, when we talk about walking through grief, is okay. It's okay. There isn't a time frame for grief for the way it goes. There isn't any like, hey, you have to do it this way. You can't do it that way. The only real rule is that you can't hurt anyone else. You can't bring harm to anyone else. Right? So grieve, feel all the feelings, but bring harm to no one. And in those moments of grief, like, go the different route. Go by the side. If that brings some level of peace to you, do it. But engaging in the peace. So I talked to a client one time who planted yellow roses because that was her father's favorite flower. And she's like, it's dumb because I'm not very good at growing them. Yeah, but it's not dumb. It's actually a way for you to engage your grief. So the first kind of rule or thing to consider is that when it comes to grief, there aren't any rules, right? You do what you need to do to survive, to process. You do what you need to do to move through it. And you do what you need to do to feel it. And as long as you're not bringing harm to yourself or to anyone else, as long as you're not engaging in self-harming behaviors or other harming behaviors, you do whatever you need to do. You survive, you move on, and you're probably going to feel anger. You're going to feel all the feelings, and that's okay. Most people grieve, especially the loss. They grieve that for the rest of their lives in some fashion, feeling things like anger, depression, sadness, hopelessness, despair. Yeah, even rage. I promise you, whatever it is you're feeling, it's okay. As long as you're not bringing harm to other people. That's something you live through, you move through it. And sometimes we have mixed feelings, right? We have feelings that don't seem to make sense in our head. And that's okay too. We can simultaneously feel grief over the loss of the person, and we feel anger with the person for leaving us. That's okay. It's okay to be in that moment of grief. there are some things we have to remember. And one of those is that there is no such thing as magic words that are going to make it better. There's no cure for grief. There's no, like, hey, you're going to say this pithy thing. We can't make sense of death. Most grief that we experience at this level will never make sense of. We just learn to somehow accept it and continue our lives. But there's not a pace to that. There's not a process to that. There's not a exact formula. There's no, sometimes I have clients and they're like, well, shouldn't I be at this stage or in this place? And that isn't how it works. I've even had clients come in and be like, well, I just think we're at different stages of grief. Okay, then above all, be kind to each other. Above all, be kind to other people. Be kind to the other people that are grieving. Be kind to the people that are grieving differently than you. But that does mean that there aren't, the cute little phrases. And sometimes you'll hear people say things like, well, heaven gained another angel. Oh, it's so great that they're reunited with fill in the blank. Well, I guess God just called him home. If the person grieving, like the person related to the person, they decide to say that, that's their business. And you can feel that, but saying it to the person grieving is rarely helpful. And one of the reasons that we have to be so kind, or make that at the forefront of our mind, is because grief is not a linear process. As humans, we crave linear processes. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? Even if we don't understand the math of it, we crave that type of linear process. But grief isn't that. One day, one moment, 1 second might be totally okay. And then the next minute you're standing at the kitchen sink pouring a glass of water and you're overcome with grief. The next minute a song comes on and you're just devastated. It's okay. But then as we walk this journey of grief together, we have to make that space for ourselves and for other people. We have to make that process for other people. And remember, when people grieve, they're using more energy than they typically use to manage their grief, which is an emotion, which means their other emotions, such as frustration and anger, tend to be expressed more because they're working on trying to, the energy that they're using to manage their grief, they would normally use to manage their frustration. And so when people are grieving, a lot of times frustration and anger comes up more because they just don't have the energy to process it as well. And we have to be cognizant of that, which brings us to perhaps the most important thing that we have to consider. You don't have to say anything. In fact, often it's better not to say anything. There's no cure for grief. There's no, it's not like, oh, you have this sickness and we give you antibiotics and you'll get better. Once grief comes into the story, death was never meant to be a part of our story. I truly believe that. And once grief from death comes into the story, being present, sitting there in the distress, sitting there in the loss, sitting there in the pain with the person, that's the thing that counts. That's the thing that wins. That's the thing that helps us move forward. That is the thing that is most helpful to the person grieving. And sometimes people try to make it about them, right? And this happens especially in religious communities. People want to make some cute saying about Jesus, and they make it about themselves because they don't know how to sit in quiet distress. So if you're sitting with someone who's grieving, just sit there and be quiet. Literally, I promise you, I love you if that's appropriate with the person. I care about you if I love you isn't. I'm sorry, and then just sit there in silence. It's okay. I'm so sorry. And then just sit there. I can't tell you how powerful that is, how powerful that can be. Just show up. When your friend is lost, when your friend is hurting, when your friend's going through grief, just show up. And here's the thing. Typically, communities are really good right after a tragedy happens. The first week, 10 days, they show up. It's after that, 2 weeks later, when life goes back to normal, that your friend needs you to show up. And don't rely on them to be like, oh yeah, I could use help with this, right? Because a lot of times what people say is like, oh hey, if you need anything, let me know. They're never going to let you know. Most people are never going to let you know. So just show up. Maybe bring a meal. Maybe just show them and start cutting the grass. If you know them that well enough, do whatever you need to do to just show up and help. Or just show up and sit with them. I had a friend who lost a son a few years ago. And I would just show up and sit on his front porch. I didn't really bring anything to the table except me. Because I didn't have any words that were going to fix it. I didn't have anything that was going to make it better. And so it became about just, hey, I'm here for you. I'm sorry. I care about you. I love you. Let's just sit here and grieve together. Okay, so that is today's episode. It's a bit shorter than it normally is. If you're going through grief, I want you to know that I feel for you. If you're grieving the loss of a loved one, I feel for you. There's not really good answers. That's the part that I think people miss. It just sucks. Losing a kid sucks. Losing a husband sucks. Losing a wife sucks. Losing a loved one sucks. Losing a dear friend, a grandma, a grandpa, aunt, uncle, mom, dad. It sucks. And it's okay to live in that distress. I want you to know that I believe in you. I believe in people's power to overcome. I don't even need to know you to know that I believe in you. I do want to let you know that a few weeks ago I mentioned that I was going to reach out to Cindy Clemshire, Robert Morris's victim, that he molested from the time she was 12 to the time she was 17. We were able to do that interview, and it will be coming in 2 weeks. August 21st will be its release date, and so I just want to let you know that is coming. We're gonna stick with that one on schedule. We're gonna move today's to next week, and then I'm not sure what we'll do with the other episodes, but we'll figure that out. If you appreciate this podcast, if you appreciate this episode, don't forget to subscribe and please share it with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend, and hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.